Part 1, The Last Goodbye, the day everything changed, a shadow on the porch. The first blush of dawn, a soft, ethereal glow, stretched across the eastern sky, painting the world outside Arthur's old farmhouse in hues of rose and lavender. Inside, the quiet hum of an aging refrigerator was the only sound, a gentle counterpoint to the rhythmic breathing of Arthur, an octogenarian steeped in the rhythms of a life well lived, and Charlie, his golden retriever, whose entire world revolved around the beat of Arthur's heart. Arthur stirred, the ancient springs of his mattress groaning a soft protest. His movements were slow, deliberate, each a testament to 80 years of existence. He pushed aside the patchwork quilt his late wife, Eleanor, had meticulously stitched, the fabric cool against his skin. A glance at the digital clock on his bedside table confirmed what his internal clock already knew, 6:30 a.m. Time for coffee, and time for Charlie. As if on cue, a soft whimper came from the dog bed beside his own. Charlie, a magnificent golden retriever, whose years had settled into a comfortable maturity, uncurled himself with a stretch that rippled through his honey-colored fur. His tail, a plume of joyful anticipation, began to thump a gentle rhythm against the wooden floor, a morning drumbeat of devotion. His large, expressive brown eyes, framed by the gentle wisdom of a well-loved animal, fixed on Arthur, a silent question in their depths. "Morning, old friend." "Morning, boy," Arthur murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that somehow managed to convey deep affection. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching down to scratch behind Charlie's ears, eliciting a soft sigh of pure contentment from the dog. This daily ritual, simple yet profound, was the bedrock of their shared existence. Since Eleanor had passed 5 years ago, leaving a void that still occasionally ached like an old wound, Charlie had become not just a pet, but a companion, a confidant, a warm, breathing anchor in the quiet sea of Arthur's solitude. The kitchen, a warm, inviting space filled with the scent of roasted coffee beans and faint memories of Eleanor's baking, welcomed them. Arthur moved with practiced ease, grinding fresh beans, the whirring sound momentarily masking the soft clink of Charlie's tags as he padded patiently at his heels. Charlie knew the routine, coffee brewing, then a careful spoonful of his favorite canned food mixed with dry kibble, the familiar clink of the bowl on the floor. He ate with relish, a soft, satisfied groan escaping him as he cleaned the bowl. Then came the highlight, the porch. It wasn't just an architectural feature of the old farmhouse, it was their sacred space. Weather-beaten, with paint peeling in places and floorboards that groaned like old men, it held the echoes of countless dawns and dusks shared. A worn wooden swing, scarred by years of sun and rain, hung precariously, a testament to its enduring use. From here, they had a commanding view of the winding gravel driveway, flanked by ancient maples, and beyond that, the gentle swell of the rolling hills, a tapestry of green that stretched towards the distant, hazy blue of the sky. Arthur settled into the swing, his ceramic mug steaming in his hands. Charlie, after a quick, satisfied stretch, lay down at his feet, head resting on his paws, ears occasionally twitching at the chirp of a robin or the distant rustle of a squirrel in the oak tree. The morning sun, now fully risen, bathed the porch in a golden embrace, chasing away the last vestiges of the night's chill. A gentle breeze, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from the overgrown trellis, stirred Arthur's thinning white hair. He closed his eyes for a moment, simply existing, feeling the warmth of the sun, the presence of his loyal friend, and the quiet contentment that permeated their world. They sat like this for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour. Arthur would occasionally sip his coffee, sometimes reading a page or two from the local newspaper, sometimes just gazing out at the familiar landscape. Charlie, ever watchful, would lift his head now and then, his soft gaze meeting Arthur's, an unspoken dialogue passing between them. A shared understanding that transcended words. Around mid-morning, the routine shifted slightly. "Come on, boy, let's stretch those legs," Arthur announced, pushing himself up from the swing. Charlie was instantly on his feet, tail wagging with renewed vigor. They walked the perimeter of Arthur's 5 acres, a well-worn path through tall grasses and fragrant wildflowers. Charlie, with the boundless energy of a retriever, bounded ahead, sniffing at intriguing scents, occasionally darting into the tree lean after an unseen rabbit, only to return quickly, panting happily, a stick clutched proudly in his jaws. Arthur, though slower, found a deep satisfaction in watching his dog revel in the simple joys of nature. He would toss the stick a few times, Charlie bringing it back with an almost ceremonial precision, dropping it at Arthur's feet with a hopeful nudge. Back at the house, Arthur spent some time pottering in his vegetable garden, a small, meticulously kept patch overflowing with ripe tomatoes and sturdy zucchini plants. Charlie lay nearby, supervising with keen interest, occasionally letting out a soft sigh as if to say, "Don't forget to water the beans, Arthur." Lunch was a simple affair, a cheese sandwich for Arthur, a few small, hard biscuits for Charlie. The afternoon would then descend into a comfortable quiet. Arthur would settle into his favorite worn armchair in the living room, a book resting unread on his lap, often drifting off into a light doze. Charlie, curled into a tight, golden ball at the foot of the chair, would mirror him, their breaths rising and falling in unison, a symphony of peaceful domesticity. This was their life. Predictable, comforting, filled with the profound, unspoken love between a man and his dog. A world built on routine, trust, and mutual adoration. But even the most steadfast routines can be shattered. "Blast it all," Arthur muttered, startling himself awake from his afternoon nap. He'd remembered he was completely out of pipe tobacco. A small, seemingly insignificant detail, but enough to disrupt the afternoon's peace. He rarely left the house after lunch, preferring to stay in, tucked safely within his familiar rhythms. Charlie, sensing the shift in Arthur's mood, lifted his head, his ears perked. Arthur patted his knee. "Just a quick run to the village, old boy. Can't be without my tobacco, can I?" Charlie rose, his tail giving a hopeful little wag. He loved car rides, the wind whipping through his fur as he stuck his head out the window. But Arthur shook his head gently. "No, not today, Charlie. Too warm for you in the truck. You be a good boy. Wait for me on the porch, all right? I won't be long." Charlie whined softly, a low rumble of disappointment. He understood. He always understood. As Arthur gathered his keys and wallet, the dog padded dutifully to the front door, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. The heavy oak door closed with a soft thud behind Arthur, and Charlie, without hesitation, moved to his usual spot on the porch. He settled himself, nose pointing towards the gravel driveway, his eyes fixed on the bend in the road where the old Ford pickup had just vanished. The sun, now past its zenith, cast long, stretching shadows across the yard. Minutes trickled into what felt like an hour. The usual time for Arthur's return came and went. Charlie's posture, initially relaxed, began to stiffen. His ears swiveled, straining to catch the familiar rumble of the truck's engine. A soft whimper escaped him, a quiet plea into the gathering silence. He rose, paced the length of the porch, then lay down again, his gaze never leaving the empty driveway. His tail, once a lively flag, drooped. Then, a sound. Distant at first, a metallic shriek that tore through the peaceful afternoon air. Followed by a sickening crunch, a dull, heavy impact that seemed to echo through the very ground. It wasn't loud enough to wake the sleeping birds, but for Charlie, whose senses were acutely tuned to every tremor in his world, it was an earthquake. He sprang to his feet, a low, guttural growl rumbling deep in his chest, a sound of primal distress. His hackles rose, his body tensing, ears flattened against his skull. He whined, a high-pitched lament, pacing frantically at the edge of the porch, looking, listening, trying to understand the sudden, terrifying shift in the atmosphere. The air, once so serene, now seemed charged with an invisible weight, a cold, foreboding certainty. But there was no engine rumble approaching. No familiar silhouette of the old pickup. Only the deepening silence, more profound now than before. As twilight began to creep across the landscape, painting the sky in melancholic shades of gray and bruised violet, Charlie's agitation slowly subsided into a profound, aching stillness. He returned to his spot on the porch, head resting on his paws, but his eyes remained wide, fixed on the empty driveway. The porch light, usually flipped on by Arthur as dusk descended, remained dark, leaving the porch in an encroaching gloom. The chill of the evening began to settle, seeping into his fur, but he didn't stir. He didn't move towards his dinner bowl, which lay untouched inside the silent house. He didn't seek the warmth of his bed. The stars began to prick the velvet canvas of the night sky, cold and indifferent. A lone owl hooted from the distant woods, a mournful sound that echoed Charlie's own deepening sorrow. He had promised to wait. And wait he would. Part 2. The Unwavering Vigil. Title: 12 Winters of Loyalty, Why He Never Left. The first night on the porch bled into the first dawn without Arthur. Charlie, a silhouette of unwavering loyalty against the pale light, had not moved. His golden fur, usually so vibrant, seemed to absorb the gray of the early morning. Hunger gnawed at him, thirst parched his throat, but these primal needs were secondary to the gnawing ache of absence. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of desperate hope through him. But the truck never appeared around the familiar bend. Days folded into weeks, each one a stark lesson in profound loneliness for Charlie. The neighbors, kind-hearted souls who lived a mile down the road, eventually noticed Arthur's prolonged absence. They knew Arthur was a solitary man, but this was different. They found Charlie on the porch, gaunt and watchful, refusing to leave his post. They tried to coax him inside, offering bowls of food and fresh water. He would take a few tentative sips, a mouthful of kibble, but his eyes never left the driveway. He would simply retreat to his spot, a silent sentinel. They understood, with a heavy heart, that he was waiting. Eventually, a relative, a distant cousin from the city, came to secure the house, placing a padlock on the front door. Charlie merely watched, then laid back down, his vigil unbroken. The warm embrace of summer faded into the crisp whisper of autumn. The vibrant green leaves of the maples that lined the driveway began their slow, fiery dance, turning brilliant reds and golds before spiraling to the ground. Charlie watched them fall, each one a silent tick of time. He adapted. He learned to shelter under the porch overhang when the rains came, shaking off the water, his focus never wavering from the road. The kind neighbors continued their infrequent visits, leaving food and water near the porch, always respecting his choice to stay. They talked to him in soft tones, words of comfort that he couldn't understand, but whose gentle cadence he recognized as kindness. Then came the first winter. It arrived with a bitter bite, ushering in skies the color of slate and winds that howled through the empty eaves of the house. The snow fell, at first in delicate flurries, then in thick, heavy blankets that transformed the familiar landscape into an alien world of white. Charlie, his fur now frosted with crystalline flakes, would huddle close to the house, seeking whatever meager shelter the porch offered. He was a creature of warmth, this golden retriever, bred for companionship and comfort, yet he endured the biting cold with a stoicism that defied his nature. His breath plumed in the frigid air, a visible sign of his unwavering life force. He would curl tightly, nose tucked into his tail, his body a silent, shivering testament to his promise. Sometimes, a thin layer of ice would crust the water in his bowl, but he'd still lap at it, breaking through with his tongue, driven by the pure, unyielding need to be ready. One winter melted into another, then another. 12 of them. Each passing year etched deeper lines of weariness into Charlie's face, dusting his muzzle with white, clouding his once bright eyes. The porch, once a vibrant hub of life, became a monument to absence. The house itself sagged, paint flaking, shutters hanging askew, a ghostly shell of its former self. But on that porch, Charlie remained. He was no longer the playful, robust dog of Arthur's last morning. He was lean, his movements stiffer, his spirit aged, yet his purpose remained crystalline clear. He was waiting. He saw new cars drive by, some slowing, occupants gazing with curiosity at the dilapidated farmhouse and the ghost-like dog who seemed to perpetually guard it. Children pointed. Sometimes, a car would stop, a worried face would peer out, but no one ever truly understood the depth of his vigil. No one knew the true story of the old man and his dog, of the promise whispered on a summer morning that echoed through a dozen silent winters. Charlie wasn't just waiting for Arthur, he was waiting for the return of his entire world, for the warmth of a hand, the sound of a voice, the end of an agonizingly long goodbye. He was hope, distilled into a single, loyal heart. And he refused to give up. He simply could not. Part 3, The Forgotten Son. Title, A Son's Burden, Returning to Ghosts. Far removed from the silent, snow-dusted porch where Charlie maintained his endless vigil, a different kind of winter had settled over Michael's life. 12 years. 12 years since he had last set foot in the sprawling, slightly ramshackle farmhouse that had once been his childhood home. 12 years since the last meaningful conversation with his father, Arthur, a conversation that had ended not with a bang, but with the hollow echo of unspoken grievances and the slamming of a car door. Michael had driven away that day, convinced he was shedding a heavy burden, a past that felt more like a cage than a comfort. He'd sought solace and success in the ceaseless churn of London's financial district, a world away from the quiet rhythms of rural life. He built a new existence, sleek and modern, deliberately devoid of the complicated emotional landscapes of his upbringing. News of his father's passing had arrived not through a heartfelt call, but a terse, official letter from a solicitor, informing him of Arthur's estate. It was a cold, formal announcement, devoid of sentiment, much like the relationship it sought to formalize. Michael felt a strange mix of emotions, a faint pang of regret for what might have been, a deeper current of unresolved anger, and a surprising, almost unwelcome sense of duty. The house, the land, Arthur's last wishes. They were now his responsibility. He felt no immediate urge to mourn. His grief had been a slow, internal erosion over years of estrangement. He was merely tying up loose ends, closing a chapter he thought he'd already finished. The drive from London was long, the urban sprawl slowly giving way to rolling hills and increasingly narrow country lanes. Each mile felt like a journey backward in time, not just geographically, but emotionally. The familiar landmarks, once beacons of his youth, now stood as silent accusers, stirring up a cocktail of memories he had carefully suppressed. The old stone bridge, the leaning willow by the stream, the weathered sign for the local pub. They triggered flashes of laughter, arguments, lessons learned, and moments misunderstood. Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw set. He was here for business, for closure, not for sentimentality. As the car rounded the final bend, the farmhouse loomed into view. Michael slowed, his breath catching unexpectedly in his throat. It looked desolate, neglected. The once vibrant garden was a tangled mess of weeds and wild growth. The porch, once meticulously kept by Arthur, was now a dusty, cobwebbed expanse, its paint peeling like sun-scorched skin. Shutters hung askew, like broken wings. The entire property seemed to sigh with an air of abandonment, a silent testament to the years without its owner's careful touch. He pulled his sleek, slicker car onto the gravel driveway, the crunch of the stones under his tires the only sound besides the faint whisper of the wind through the tall, unkempt grass. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt enormous, suffocating. He sat there for a long moment, simply staring at the house, at the ghosts of memories it evoked. He saw his younger self, rebellious and restless, desperate to escape. He saw his father, a stoic, quiet man who found solace in the simple routines of farm life, a man Michael had struggled to understand. There was a knot of tension in Michael's stomach, a mixture of dread and a reluctant curiosity. Stepping out of the car, Michael stretched, trying to shake off the stiffness of the drive and the heavier stiffness in his soul. He walked towards the front gate, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the profound stillness. He noticed the overgrown bushes, the broken fence post, the general air of decay. He hadn't expected it to be pristine, but the extent of the neglect was stark. It was as if time had simply stopped here the moment Arthur had left. As he reached the gate, his eyes scanned the porch, taking in the familiar swing, the worn floorboards. He knew nothing of Charlie, nothing of the dog Arthur had taken in years after Michael had left. No letters from his father had ever mentioned a dog. No calls had ever relayed the simple joys of a new companionship. Michael's world had been separate, insulated. So, when his gaze swept across the porch, he saw only an empty space, a dilapidated piece of architecture. He was so focused on his own internal landscape, on the ghosts of his past and the burden of his present, that he entirely missed the very real, very present shadow of golden fur nestled in the corner, a figure so still and camouflaged by time and neglect that it seemed merely another part of the decaying structure. He didn't see the aged golden retriever, whose form, though frail, was still resolutely fixed on the curve of the driveway. He didn't notice the slight twitch of a ear as the car door opened, nor the faint, almost imperceptible lift of a gray muzzle. Charlie, 12 years on, was an expert at quiet waiting, a master of stillness. And Michael, burdened by his own history, was not yet ready to see the living ghost that awaited him. He simply pushed open the creaking gate, oblivious, and headed towards the front door, ready to face the empty house and the memories within. But the house wasn't entirely empty, and the memories were about to become far more complicated. Part 4, A Bark in the Silence. Title: The Old House's Secret, A Glimmer of Gold. The front door, a heavy slab of oak that had once stood as a proud gateway to a bustling home, groaned in protest as Michael pushed it open. A thick layer of dust, disturbed by the sudden rush of air, danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windowpanes, making the air taste stale and metallic. The house was cold, a deep, pervasive chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature and everything to do with years of abandonment. Every step Michael took echoed in the hollow silence, amplifying the feeling of stepping into a mausoleum of memories. He walked through the living room, once filled with the scent of pipe tobacco and old books, now smelling only of disuse. Dust sheets draped over furniture like ghostly shrouds, preserving outlines but obscuring detail. The kitchen, where Eleanor had baked and Arthur had made his morning coffee, was equally stark, the counters bare, the sink stained. Each room was a physical manifestation of loss, of time simply stopping. Michael felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a mix of old resentments and a newer, unfamiliar pang of something akin to regret. He ran a hand over a dusty countertop, a faint impression of his father's presence lingering in the quiet. His mission, as he'd framed it, was practical: assess the property, gather what was necessary, dispose of the rest. He headed for his father's study, a small room at the back of the house where Arthur had kept his few important papers. As he passed the archway leading to the living room, a sound, faint but distinct, reached him. A soft whimper. Michael paused, his hand on the doorframe. He frowned, listening. The house was empty. He was alone. It must have been the wind, or the old house settling. He dismissed it and took another step. Then, he heard it again. Louder this time, a low, almost mournful sound, followed by a faint thump-thump. It seemed to come from the front of the house, near the porch. Curiosity, sharper than the desire to get on with the task at hand, pricked at him. He turned, retracing his steps, moving silently towards the front door. He pushed aside the heavy drapes in the living room, allowing more light to flood in. Through the grimy window, he peered out at the porch. And then he saw him. A lump formed in Michael's throat. Tucked into the far corner of the porch, nestled against the weathered siding, was a dog. Not just any dog, but an old, undeniably golden retriever. Its fur, matted and dull, was a far cry from the vibrant gold he remembered from photographs of his childhood pets. Its frame was gaunt, almost skeletal, and its muzzle was dusted entirely white. But as the dog lifted its head, its eyes, though clouded with age, held an unmistakable depth, a familiar sorrow, and an undeniable flicker of hope. The dog wasn't just sitting there, it was watching. Its gaze was fixed on the driveway, on the very spot where Arthur's truck had disappeared 12 years ago. A profound, almost unbearable realization began to dawn on Michael. This wasn't just a dog. This was his dog. Or rather, Arthur's dog. A dog that had clearly been there, waiting, for a very, very long time. He felt a sudden, inexplicable rush of emotions, shock, confusion, a terrible, wrenching guilt. How could he not have known? How could everyone have left this loyal creature to such a lonely vigil? He remembered stories from his childhood, tales of dogs who waited. But this was real. This was his father's dog, a silent guardian of a memory. Slowly, carefully, Michael unlatched the front door and pushed it open. It opened with a long, drawn-out creak that made Charlie flinch slightly, his ears swiveling towards the sound. His head turned slowly, those ancient eyes meeting Michael's. There was no immediate bark, no joyous leap. Just a quiet, almost hesitant recognition. A single, weak thump of his tail against the worn porch floor, a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of gold in the overwhelming silence. Michael stepped out onto the porch, the air cold but strangely charged with the dog's unwavering presence. He knelt down slowly, extending a tentative hand. "Charlie," he whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue, yet instinctively right. The dog watched him, a flicker of something new in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or a question. And then, with an effort that seemed to cost him dearly, Charlie began to drag his tired body forward, inch by painful inch, towards the outstretched hand. The connection, severed for over a decade, was about to be remade. Part 5, Unraveling the Truth. Title, Arthur's Last Gift, The Dog Who Knew Everything. The touch was tentative, hesitant on both sides. Michael's hand, calloused from years of gripping a briefcase and tapping a keyboard, gently brushed against Charlie's matted fur. The dog, in turn, offered a soft, almost imperceptible nudge of his head, a silent acknowledgement of the contact. It was a fragile bridge across a chasm of time and misunderstanding. Michael stayed kneeling, his gaze sweeping over Charlie. He saw the age, the weariness, but also the unwavering spirit in those deep-set eyes. He ran his hand more firmly now, feeling the thinness of the dog's frame, the prominent ribs beneath the fur. A wave of shame washed over him. How could he have been so consumed by his own past that he had failed to see this living testament to loyalty? "You've been here all this time, haven't you, boy?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Charlie responded with a low whine, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 12 years of waiting. Michael spent the rest of that day tending to Charlie. He brought fresh water and food, which the dog devoured with a quiet intensity, a hunger that spoke of countless missed meals. He cleaned the matted fur, gently removing burrs and tangles, revealing the faded gold beneath the grime. He spoke to Charlie in soft tones, words of comfort and apology, though he knew the dog couldn't understand the specifics. But he sensed, with a growing certainty, that Charlie understood the emotion behind the words. As evening approached, Michael ventured into the house, determined to find some clue, some explanation for Charlie's unwavering vigil. He started with Arthur's study, the small, cluttered room at the back of the house. It was just as he remembered it, shelves overflowing with books, a worn leather armchair, a desk piled high with papers. He began to sift through the documents, expecting to find legal papers, bank statements, the mundane detritus of a life. Instead, he found journals. Old, leather-bound notebooks filled with Arthur's neat, spidery handwriting. They were a chronicle of his life after Eleanor's passing, a window into his thoughts, his feelings, his quiet routines. And in them, Charlie was a constant presence. Michael sat in the worn armchair, the journals spread across his lap, and began to read. He learned about Arthur's profound loneliness, the gaping hole Eleanor's absence had left in his life. He read about how Charlie, a stray who had wandered onto the property shortly after her death, had gradually filled that void. The dog had been a source of comfort, a reason to get up each morning, a silent confidant who listened without judgment. Arthur wrote about their walks, their shared moments on the porch, the simple joys of companionship. He described Charlie's intelligence, his intuition, his unwavering devotion. And then, he wrote about the day of the accident. The entry was brief, almost clinical, but the pain bled through the carefully chosen words. Arthur described his errand to the village, his promise to Charlie to wait on the porch. He wrote of the sudden, blinding impact, the world turning black. He never mentioned the other driver, the details of the crash. He focused only on Charlie, on the image of his loyal dog waiting patiently on the porch, a picture that had haunted his final moments. "I know he'll be waiting," Arthur had written, his hand trembling slightly, the ink smudged. "He always waits. God forgive me for leaving him alone." Michael closed the journal, his hand shaking. The weight of his father's words, the magnitude of Charlie's loyalty, crashed down on him. He understood now. Charlie wasn't just waiting for Arthur to come back. He was waiting for the promise to be fulfilled. He was waiting for the world to return to the way it was, to the rhythm of their shared life. He was waiting for the impossible. He found other entries, scattered throughout the years, mentioning Charlie's unwavering vigil. Arthur had known. He had understood the depth of the dog's devotion. He had worried about him, grieved for him, even from beyond the grave. And Michael, in his self-imposed exile, had known nothing. He found a faded photograph tucked between the pages of one of the journals. It was a picture of Arthur and Charlie on the porch, Arthur smiling, his arm around the dog's shoulders, Charlie's head resting contentedly against his leg. It was a snapshot of a perfect, simple love. Michael stared at the photograph, tears welling in his eyes. He saw his father, not as the stoic, distant figure of his memory, but as a man capable of profound tenderness. He saw Charlie, not as a neglected animal, but as a hero, a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty. He knew what he had to do. He had to honor his father's unspoken wish. He had to care for Charlie. He had to become the man his father had always hoped he would be. He had to give Charlie a reason to stop waiting. He stood up, the photograph clutched in his hand, and walked out of the study, a new sense of purpose filling him. He found Charlie on the porch, curled up in his usual spot, his eyes still fixed on the driveway. Michael knelt down beside him, placing a hand on his back. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to wait anymore." Charlie lifted his head, those ancient eyes meeting Michael's. And for the first time in 12 years, a flicker of something that resembled peace settled in their depths. The waiting might finally be over. Part 6, A Second Chance. Title, The Return, a bond rekindled, a family rebuilt. The days that followed Michael's discovery of Charlie were a blur of activity, fueled by a powerful, newfound purpose. The city slicker, who had once found solace only in spreadsheets and sterile office spaces, now found himself covered in dust and dog hair, working tirelessly. His initial intention to merely settle the estate had evaporated, replaced by an urgent need to bring life back to the old farmhouse, for Charlie's sake, and perhaps, for his own. His first priority was Charlie. He ensured the old dog had a comfortable bed inside the house, in a warm, sunny spot. He fed him nourishing meals, carefully portioned, and spent hours gently brushing his matted coat, slowly coaxing out the tangles of 12 years of neglect. Charlie, initially hesitant, slowly began to unfurl, his old eyes softening, a faint tremor of a tail wag becoming more frequent. He still gravitated to the porch, a habit ingrained deep within his bones, but now Michael was there too, sitting beside him, sharing the quiet moments. The house, too, began its slow journey back to life. Michael tackled the grime with a vengeance, scrubbing away years of dust and disuse. He patched peeling paint, replaced broken shutters, and cleared the overgrown garden. Each act of restoration felt like a personal penance, a way to atone for his long absence, for the life he had unknowingly left behind. As the house shed its skin of decay, It began to feel less like a ghost and more like a home. During these tasks, Charlie was his shadow. The dog, despite his age, would follow Michael from room to room, sometimes resting his head on Michael's foot as he worked, other times simply watching, a silent, comforting presence. It was a mirroring of the bond Arthur and Charlie had shared, a quiet companionship that required no words, only presence. Michael found himself talking to Charlie, not just the casual murmurs, but recounting his day, sharing thoughts, sometimes even speaking aloud to his father through the dog. "He always loved that old rose bush, didn't he, boy?" And Charlie would respond with a soft sigh, a gentle nudge of his head. One afternoon, Michael found himself on the porch swing, just as his father had done, the wood creaking softly beneath him. Charlie lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, watching the driveway. But this time, Charlie's gaze wasn't fixed with desperate longing. It was calm, serene. He was simply enjoying the sun, his human close by. Michael looked out at the familiar landscape, the rolling hills, the ancient maples, but now he saw it through different eyes. He saw the beauty, the peace, the quiet endurance. He understood why his father had loved this place so fiercely, why he had found solace here. He understood that Arthur's stoicism wasn't a lack of emotion, but a deep, quiet well of feeling, expressed in the care of his home, his land, and his loyal dog. The guilt that had weighed on him began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Through Charlie, Michael was reconnecting with his father, not just his memory, but the essence of the man he had been. Charlie was Arthur's last, most precious gift, a bridge connecting the estranged son to the loving father he had misunderstood. As the weeks turned into months, the house transformed. The garden bloomed under Michael's patient hand. The porch, freshly painted, became a welcoming space again. But the most profound transformation was in Charlie. His fur regained its luster, his eyes sparkled with a renewed light, and while his movements were still slow with age, there was a spryness that hadn't been there before. He would greet Michael at the door with a gentle tail wag, no longer just a waiting ghost, but a loved companion. Michael, too, had changed. The sharp edges of his city life had softened. The need for constant motion, for endless achievement, had quieted. He found himself relishing the mornings on the porch with Charlie, the simple joy of a shared walk, the quiet evenings by the fire. He still had responsibilities in London, but they no longer consumed him. He had found something far more valuable here, a sense of belonging, a connection to his roots, and a love that had patiently waited for him to return. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Michael sat on the porch swing, Charlie curled at his feet. He looked at the dog, then out at the peaceful landscape. "You kept your promise, old boy," he whispered, stroking Charlie's head. "And now, I'll keep mine." Charlie lifted his head, his gentle eyes meeting Michael's. He let out a soft sigh, a sound of deep contentment. The vigil was truly over. The home, once shattered by loss and neglect, was whole again. And in the quiet understanding between a man and a loyal dog. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through this wonderful tale. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves mystical tales. And don't forget to subscribe to The Real Furry Stories for more unforgettable stories of love, loss, and the bonds that never die. Until next time, may your lanterns always stay lit. Hearty goodbye.